Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here with you this morning. My name is Chris Russell, and I'm from Goshen, Indiana. So we've got some nice cooler weather than you have here. Would you say it's supposed to be 90 something? I'm getting some major feedback there. So my wife and I, we're going to celebrate 20 years of marriage next year, which is awesome. And we've got 4 kiddos. One of them that's finishing up college, and then we have 3 girls. We adopted 3 girls 4 years ago, so they are 18, 14, and 8 now. Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up as one of 3 boys. 3 girls, that's a whole different ball game. There's a whole different level of drama in our house with 3 girls. That's why I volunteer to go on the road a lot and share. And I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Love my girls, would do absolutely anything for them. So, how many of you are like me? Obviously, this past year and a half during COVID has been just crazy. And we've been able to gather a lot less overall in the last year and a half. So how many of you are guilty like me of doing just a little bit more binge watching of TV shows? Anybody during that last year? Okay, we got 8 of you that are honest. Okay, maybe a future topic for series about truthfulness. So one of the things that we've been watching is Chicago Fire. How many of you have seen that show? Anybody seen Chicago Fire? Awesome show. It's about the men and women of Firehouse Station 51 in Chicago. And these are broken, messed up, imperfect people just like you and me. But every shift, they put their lives on the line going out on a rescue mission. And you can imagine that idea of a rescue mission is something that's pretty near and dear to my heart. But the reality is this concept of a rescue mission isn't anything new. It's been around for a long, long time. In fact, if we go all the way back to the first book of the Bible in Genesis, we read about how God created man and woman in his image. But ultimately, Adam and Eve chose their way over God's way. And that's really the simplest definition of sin I know, is choosing our way over God's way. And the consequences of that were devastating. To be eternally separated from God, to have brokenness in the world around us. And God looked at that situation and he wasn't okay with it. He wasn't okay with the idea of his people being eternally separated from him. So at that point, God started the ultimate rescue mission. And from then on, story after story that we read in Scripture is about God showing up and rescuing people. And eventually, in his perfect timing, he sent the ultimate rescuer in Jesus Christ, who lived a perfect life and paid the penalty that you and I deserve at the cross. And whenever one of us places our trust in Jesus, we begin a new rescue story. All of us who have made a decision to follow Jesus have a rescue story, and that's going to look different for you than it does for me. But all of us have been rescued from something for something. And every one of those rescue stories is worthy of celebrating. Last year, I had the high privilege of officiating my dad's funeral. And I don't know how many of you have been hit with the same thing, but my dad suffered from dementia the last 4 years of his life. And if you have a loved one who was in that battle or maybe is currently in that battle, you know the difficulty of that. When you get someone that you've loved for so long that gets to a place where they don't even recognize you anymore and know who you are. And out at the very end, my dad did not know who any of us 3 boys were. And he knew that my mom was somebody special, but he didn't know exactly who she was. But there was one thing that my dad never forgot to do right up to the end. You know what that was? Dance. My dad loved to dance. And he could be so seemingly out of it, and somebody would turn on music, and within 10 seconds, my dad would be sitting there, and all of a sudden, man, he'd just start moving, and unfortunately, he passed those moves on down to me. So that's about all you get from me, dance moves. Luke's some similar dancer as well, if you've seen him dance. But that's pretty much it. He'd just get in the chair, and then he'd get up, and then he'd get up to his feet, and he'd start going, and then he'd grab one of the nearest workers, and he'd start dancing with her, and like right up to the end. My dad loved to dance. In fact, my dad passed away on December 31st, And we believe part of the reason he chose to go on that day was because they were at a retirement center and they were doing their New Year's party from 3 to 6 p.m. because they were afraid it was going to be too late for people. And my dad was like, not okay with that. So I think Dad decided he was going to go to the ultimate dance party for New Year's Eve. So he went. But one of the things that I love and remember so much about my dad is I turned 50 this past July. And when my dad was in his early 50s, I remember that suddenly he had this amazing conviction from God about how to share his faith with other people. Like he wanted to get better at doing that. And he was taking classes at the church in Pittsburgh that he went to. And the reason behind my dad's motivation was his dad, my grandpa. Because at that time, my grandpa was 89 years old and did not have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And my dad was not okay with that. And so my dad started taking classes, and he would call and talk to me, and we would talk about what does it mean to share Jesus with others and pull others into that love-altering, eternity-altering relationship with Jesus Christ. And then my dad started making the drive from Pittsburgh to mid-state New York every other weekend so he could sit down with Grandpa and share Jesus with Grandpa. And then it happened. At the age of 91, my grandpa gave his life to Christ. And I remember a few months later that Grandpa came to our house for Thanksgiving, and everybody's got their own traditions for Thanksgiving. And our tradition is my dad always prays over our family at Thanksgiving time. And my grandpa asked if he could do the prayer that year. And I'll tell you, to this day, I don't remember a single word that man prayed, but I remember it being the most beautiful prayer I'd ever heard in my entire life. Because it represented a new rescue story. And every rescue story is worth celebrating. Here's something I want to make sure that you hear very clearly in our time together. God is the ultimate rescuer. But what he does for you and what he does for me, he invites us to join him in doing for others. Let me say that again and let that settle into the deepest part of your soul. God is the ultimate rescuer. But what he does for you and what he does for me, he invites us to join him in doing for others. God takes broken, imperfect people, messed up people like you and me and my dad and my grandpa, and he allows us to play a part of bringing rescue to others. And while our spiritual rescue is the ultimate form of rescue, there are many other types of rescue that our Father invites us to join him in carrying out. And throughout the Bible, we read account after account of God calling his people to step into situations to rescue others from all kinds of injustice. We see Noah, who's called to rescue the remaining faithful before the flood came. We read about Moses, who was used to set thousands and thousands of slaves free from the Egyptians. We learn about a young queen named Esther, who helped to rescue her people from certain destruction. We read about miracles performed by the apostles to bring healing and wholeness. The list goes on and on. People who are being rescued from pain and suffering, people who are being rescued from hardened hearts, people who are being rescued from abuse and neglect, rescued from guilt and shame, rescued from injustice. The theme of rescue saturates our scriptures. And all of these rescue stories, they start with God ultimately, but there is often a time where he stirs inside of you and me to join him in his rescue efforts. And when he stirs, we need to be obedient. And we need to step into tough situations. We need to be faithful, and we need to seek out the lost. And we need to be relentless in setting the captives free. I don't know of a person on this planet who is more relentless in setting the captives free than my teammate, Tony Kerwin, who is also the founder of Destiny Rescue. So Tony and his wife went on vacation. This is back in 1998. Tony and his wife went on vacation to Thailand. And while they were in Thailand, they ended up overhearing a conversation that turned out to be a trafficker talking to another tourist who was offering a very young child to this tourist for $400 to do whatever they wanted with this child all night long. That became their introduction to this reality of the sex trafficking of children. And their prayer became, God, have mercy on these kids. And who wouldn't pray that, right? But then God did what he often does, and he started to stir. And Tony was an electrician by trade. They went back home, and God kept stirring inside of them and wouldn't let go. And eventually that prayer changed from God have mercy on these kids to God have mercy on us if we don't do something to help these kids. And they moved to Thailand in 2001 and started rescuing kids out of sex trafficking situations. And Tony's got this saying that's so simple, but it's so true. We only have two choices: do nothing or do something. Most of you are familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I'm not going to get into who's who, what role they played in society, but what's the gist of the story? Somebody is going down the road, they get jumped, beaten within a half inch of their life, and left on the side of the road to die. And then three people come along. And what do we read about those three people? The first person comes along, they see the injustice that's happened, and they keep moving on down the road. The second person comes along, they see the same injustice. In fact, some versions tell us that they went over and took a closer look at it, but at the end of the day, they went back to life as usual. But then the third person came along. The third person who saw the same injustice that the other two saw before him, and he couldn't just walk on by. He couldn't look at that injustice and go back to life as usual. Something stirred inside of him that he had to step into that difficult situation and do something about it. And that's my prayer for you as individuals, as businesses, as organizations, as a church family, is that as we continue to talk about this topic, as we continue to seek after God's heart for this issue and our role in it, that God is going to stir in you to a point where you can't go back to life as usual anymore. You're going to feel stirred, you're going to feel compelled, and you're going to lean into it, and you're going to choose to do something about it. One of my favorite verses that summarizes what we do is found in Psalms 82. Listen to this. This is God's marching orders to all of us. Give justice to the poor and the orphan. Uphold the rights of the oppressed and the destitute. Listen to this. Rescue the poor and the helpless. Deliver them from the grasp of evil people. That is literally what we are talking about today. Delivering children from the grasp of evil people. So let's talk about big picture here. How many football fans? Football started up again. We're glad. Anybody been to a football game? It's nice to be able to get around people again and everything. NFL is by far our most successful sport, right, in the U.S. here. Makes money hand over fist. So we know, we're not going to talk COVID year because that threw everybody off. But in 2019, the NFL made a profit of $8 billion. How many of you would like to just have a sliver of that, right? $8 billion profit. Baseball, basketball, football, and hockey combined, our four biggest sports, made a profit of $30 billion. Human trafficking made over $150 billion. It is the fastest growing criminal activity in the world. There are more people in slavery now around the world than there have ever been in the history of the world. It makes more money than illegal drugs and firearms now. And why is that? If you own a gun, you sell a gun, you make a profit one time. If you own a girl, hundreds and maybe thousands of times that you're making profits. And of that 150 billion, it's estimated that 99 billion of that is specifically sex trafficking. And what we know is right now, there are over 1 million children on our planet that are being sex trafficked on a regular basis. And we know of the 1 million kids that are being sex trafficked. About almost 3/4 of that is in Southeast Asia. There's a lower view of women in general in Southeast Asia, less opportunities for women as far as the kinds of jobs that they can have. So that literally means, what time is it now? Give me ballpark time. What is it? 10:30? Okay. So that means literally right now, it's 10:30 in the morning here. Here we are, safe place, surrounded by people who love us, who want the best for us, who are pouring into our lives. So that means literally halfway around the world, it's 10:36 p.m. in the worst place on the planet where kids are being abused. So right now, as we're sitting here comfortably, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of children right now are being used and abused. That's not okay. That is not okay. I know, I mean, how many young girls have I seen today already? And I think everybody in here, whether it's a child or a grandchild or just some other ladies that are in the church family or in your community, all of us can bring to mind young women who are very special to us in our lives. And my guess is all of us would do anything to make sure that they stay safe, to make sure that they know that they are loved and that they are cherished. The church doesn't get to stick its head in the sand on this one. We don't get to go back to life as usual knowing this reality is happening around us. We are to join God on a mission rescue to set these kids free. And because of people like you, because of church families like yours, as of last weekend, this year alone, we have been able to rescue 1,404 individuals out of sex trafficking situations. The youngest of those were 2 8-month-olds. One of those was a kidnapping situation, which is not very common. You know, you see movies and stuff with trafficking or kidnapping. When it comes to sex trafficking, it's much more of a grooming process. So kidnapping is not extremely common. But one of those was a kidnapping situation that we were asked to help out with, and we were able to get her back pretty quickly. And another one was, we'll talk a little bit later on, where these girls that are in brothels, if they have a baby, that baby becomes property of the brothel. And it's just a matter of time before some creep is going to decide that that looks interesting. And we were able to get her out of there before anything happened to her. We are rescuing in 9 different countries right now, and our goal is to be in 30 countries by the end of 2030. So we're already in conversations with the next 4 or 5 countries. So that's kind of that big 30,000-foot view of how massive this issue is. So how does all this happen? How do we go about doing all of this stuff? Our frontline team is constantly on the lookout for children who are being preyed upon and exploited. Girls like Lee, who at the age of 15, she was kicked out of her home in the small village that she was at. She was told by her mother that she was dead weight and that she needed to start making money to support the family. So she took the 6-hour ride to the big city to start work at a restaurant, where she was told that you got a job here, you can sleep here tonight, here's a new dress, and you start working tomorrow. And within an hour of being in that room, one man after another showed up and raped her all night long. And that was her introduction to what was going to be her new life for the next year and a half until we got her out of that situation. She was forced to drink a lot of alcohol and to take drugs. If she refused any man, she was beaten severely. Girls like Bodum, who grew up in a loving home, but her father died suddenly and they were left with a huge debt. She went to the city in search of a job. A trafficker realized the naiveness of this young girl and coerced her into working at a brothel where men used her over and over again, and she felt dirty and full of shame all the time. Girls like Noy, who remembers spending every day in her room crying until it was time to go to work again. She was always afraid of the violent men, and she felt worthless as she thought everybody saw her as simply a prostitute and nothing more. Our team is relentless about finding those kinds of children and setting them free to live out their God-preferred futures. So how do we do this? So we have 4 primary ways, I would say like 4 categories of ways that we do rescue. I'm going to talk just a little bit about each one. Covert, border, raid, and interventional. So when we're talking about interventional rescues, those are ones like we do get involved with labor trafficking. We do get involved with children who are forced to be street beggars. Temple prostitution that you read about in the Old Testament, still very much a thing in our world. We've rescued 12 and 13-year-old girls out of temple prostitution situations as well. So border rescues. Border rescues, Nepal is one of the countries that we rescue in. It's an open border with a neighboring country. That's one of our undisclosed countries. We have certain countries that will always be undisclosed if we're recording or something on social media because it's so dangerous for our workers to be in there, whether it's because of the violence in that country or because with being a Christian organization and being very persecuted for our faith in those countries. But Nepal has an open border with this neighboring country. Thousands of people go back and forth all the time, so that's not uncommon at all. We have 14 border stations between these two countries. And almost all of our agents are females at these border stations. They're working 10-hour days in 100-degree heat. And they have permission from the government to stop anyone who looks like a minor that's getting ready to cross the border. Because what's happening is traffickers are going into Nepal and they're promising these girls great paying jobs, which if you're at a place where you're extremely poor and desperate, you're hoping for the best. Or they're playing this ruse that they've fallen in love with the girl and want her to come back to their country, marry her, and give her the life of her dreams. And the girls go having no clue that this is what's happening. And we're interrupting that trafficking flow. So our agents get to stop these girls at the border and ask them a series of questions. Where are you going? What are you going to do when you get there? Where you promise this? Where you promise that? And the traffickers aren't with the girls because they know that our border state agents might likely stop those girls. So they've set it up that, hey, I'll meet you in the market in such and such a city. So our ladies stop them. They call back to the family if there's any red flags about their story. 99% of the time, the parents had no idea their daughter was at the border getting ready to cross into this other country. And if she had taken one step across that border, her family would have never seen her again. She would have been stepping into one of the most horrific trafficking countries on the planet. So the good news with those is those are preemptive rescues. 99% of those girls that we rescue have not been abused yet. So obviously we love those kinds of rescues as much as we can. But that's about a quarter of our rescues. Another quarter of our rescues are what we call covert rescues. So we are one of the few organizations in the world that actually has our own undercover agents. We have between 30 and 40 full-time cover agents that are constantly on the lookout for where girls are being used and abused. We're actually the only organization I'm aware of, anti-trafficking, that actually focuses specifically on children. Everything we do starts with looking for underage girls. As you imagine, in the sex industry, at least 98% of those who are being used and abused are women and young girls. So covert rescues, I'm not one of our undercover agents, but when I lead team trips to countries where we're rescuing in, I get to go out with our undercover agents. So we're going into these places and we're pretending to be, imagine how hard this is, we're pretending to be a group of guys out for a fun night on the town. So we're going into places where we've identified underage girls. We go in, we sit at a table, we order a drink, and the girls literally gather around your table, and then you select which one you want to sit with you and probably take back to your hotel that night. They don't have hello, my name is tags on them. Nobody cares what their name is. And many places you go into, they literally have numbers pinned onto their outfits, and that's how you order them for the night. And our goal is to build a trust level with these girls so that after a few nights, we're able to pay what's called the bar fine. That's how we get around it. So let's say you own a bar, and I think there's underage girls there. I send my guys in. I can't just get a girl, go upstairs and have sex with her. The way they get around it is I'll pay you a bar fine. Maybe I pay you $50 because you're losing an employee who'd be selling drinks and making you money. And then I negotiate a price with the girl, take her wherever I want, do whatever I want all night long with her. And then she shows up to work the next night and it starts all over again for her. And that's 7 nights a week that that's happening to her. Our goal is to build that trust level, pay the bar fine, take her to somewhere safe a few blocks away where one of our caseworkers is that's able to say, hey, this is who we really are. This is what we can do to help you get out of this. And then they can choose to go into our care at that point and be set free. So that's about a quarter of our rescues. So I've got a video that we're going to show now. This is Tony. This is our founder. And this is him recalling a time where he went out on one of these covert rescues that I was talking about. Take a look at this.
I remember one night I got a phone call from one of the boys. He was in a brothel. he was really desperate. He said he had a 13-year-old girl, and there was heaps of guys that were trying to take this kid off him, and he was scared he was going to get violent. So one of the boys and I jumped on our bikes and we headed straight over there, and it was quite a small, grubby little bar, about 4 or 5 tables. All of them were filled with guys drinking beer and basically staring at the young girls that were handing out the drinks. And I went over and sat down at the table with the boys, and as I did, I noticed in the back corner there looked like a stairwell going down underneath the floor. So I snuck over there and went down those stairs to see what was down there. And as I got down there, I could see they'd dug out underneath the brothel and built roughly about 7 small rooms. And it was just like a thick smell of stale sweat. It was really quite disgusting. And I walked around the corner, and as soon as I got around there, I could see straight away these pair of small red shoes that some kid had obviously kicked off as she was taken into the room. And as I stood there feeling really helpless, I could hear what was going on in that room. And remember standing there realising what that 13-year-old kid that we had up at the table upstairs, what she would have to do every single night. And I knew if we didn't do something tonight, she would end up down here at some point doing what that girl was doing right then. So I went back upstairs and sat down next to that kid. And as I did that, the agent leant over to me and he said, this girl's been here for about a week, and every night, usually 4 or 5 times, she gets taken downstairs and she's forced to have sex with customers and basically raped by these violent men. And I looked over at this kid and she was looking at me, and her eyes just, she was petrified, and it was like she was begging me to do something to get her out of that place. So I called the mamasa and the brothel owner over, and I said I wanted to take this kid back to my hotel room, and we negotiated a price to do that. In the brothel owner's mind, I was taking her away to have sex, but what was really happening is we were taking her away to her freedom. And we just stood up, and this kid took my hand and we walked out that brothel. She jumped on the back of my bike and we took off to one of our rescue homes. And as we arrived, I looked back and I just saw this gorgeous smile on this kid's face as she realised that what we were saying was true. And she went to bed, and I think she slept for 1 or 2 days, which is quite normal. And something these kids often say is, you know, that's the first time I can remember in a long time that I've been able to go to bed and just sleep. And you know, my dream is that all children will be able to go to bed and sleep and not work. I have a photo on my mobile phone of those little red shoes as a constant reminder that there's still one more out there. One more kid worth rescuing, never to stop. Every kid is worth the risk, worth the love, worth the cost.
So that's about a quarter of our rescues are those kinds of situations. And the other half of our rescues are what we call raids. So raid is where we take things to a whole new level. Raids are where we have what's called an MOU. It's a memorandum of understanding. It's the legal document saying that we're working hand in hand with this country on this issue. Now our guys are able to go in with their hidden body cameras on them, gather evidence about underage girls being used, but also gather legal evidence against the traffickers themselves. And when we have enough evidence and we get the green light from the local police, we'll go in and do a joint raid on that place. So we're able to rescue kids, we're able to arrest traffickers, we're able to shut down establishments that think they can profit off the use and abuse of kids, and we're able to prosecute those traffickers to the fullest extent of the law. But here's something I want to make sure that you understand very clearly as well. These stories that I talk about, girls who are being rescued, the story that you just saw of Tony sharing about a rescue, their stories do not start the night that our agents get them out of that situation. That is not the beginning of their rescue story. Their rescue story begins on a morning just like this, when God stirs in the hearts of his people to do something. And because people step up and lean into that and decide to do something, that starts a series of events in a place that ultimately leads to our agents being able to get in to that next place to be able to set those kids free. But that's the power of what we have together today, is that together we have the choice to launch brand new rescue stories today. It's not just about setting kids free. We want to make sure that they stay free as well. And we want to ultimately introduce them to the ultimate rescuer in Jesus Christ. But we have what we call a path to freedom. And you don't have to read everything that's on that screen. But basically, it's simply saying is that every girl that we rescue that comes into our care, the people who know her best are going to come alongside her and make sure that she has a path to freedom that's going to help her be successful for the long haul. So we're going to meet any educational needs, medical needs, physical needs, social needs, psychological needs, spiritual needs. We're going to figure out a plan for each girl individually that's going to help them to be able to travel this difficult journey. And as a Christian organization, forgiveness is part of that. If these girls don't get to the place, and we all know how this is with forgiveness, right? If we get stuck in a place where we can't forgive, we're the ones who don't get to move forward. And all of us have experienced that at some level or another. And I can't imagine what these girls have gone through. I mean, I can't say, oh, yes, I understand, because I don't. And when some of these girls who have been used and abused thousands of times, to be able to get to a place of being able to forgive so that their healing journey can continue, that's something I can't even completely wrap my head around. But we've seen it happen over and over and over again. And we've seen girls who have been so broken. We have seen God work in a way that only he can to redeem those lives, to redeem their stories, and set them free in every way imaginable. We want to see each girl thrive in life and follow after this Jesus who's crazy in love with them. Shrey Nye was a girl that we had rescued in Cambodia some years back, and she had called a couple years ago to our staff in Cambodia and was just giving a life update. You know, when she had entered into our program, she went into, we always have a job training component as well, because it's not going to do us any good to rescue these kids if we can't set them up for success to support themselves and their families for the long haul. They're in danger of getting pulled back in this. And when she was in our program, she had taken a job as a seamstress in a local company. And now she was thriving in her walk with God. She was reintegrated back in her home village. She had gotten married, and they were expecting their first child. And things were going really well with her. And now, 2 years after having left our project, she was a supervisor overseeing 4 groups of managers and over 200 employees. And what she loved the most was how she was encouraged and loved on at Destiny Rescue. She was now able to turn around and do that to these hundreds of employees that were under her supervision. And her biggest gratitude about being in our program was that we introduced her to Jesus Christ. And she now had that love relationship and was living out that hope-filled future that he had for her. So how do we join in this? How do we start some new rescue stories? So let me talk about the financial side of things, because obviously that's an important part of stuff. This is what we know from doing this for 20 years. We know that the average cost to rescue a child is $1,500. That is the average cost. That's the cost for us to send our undercover agents in where we've identified girls being used and abused, to do their undercover work and to get that girl to a safe place to start her path to freedom. $1,500. That literally changes a child's life. And this is what I also know. You and I live in the richest country in the history of the world. What more would anybody do with $1,500 in their lifetime that could be more significant than setting a child free from this horrific darkness? I can't think of a single thing. I mean, I know I work for this organization, but I thought this before I worked for this organization. Like, what would you possibly do in life with $1,500 that would be more significant than that? And some of you are in a position to do that. Some of you could write a check today and set a child free and start a new rescue story. The other thing we have is what we call rescue partners. Rescue partner is any monthly amount. And what we love about the rescue partner is that means everybody can be a part of that. And there's brochures on the ledge back there if you're interested in that. But all of us can do something to be a part of this fight. So I literally have people who do $1 a month, and I have people who do $1,500 a month. It's just this idea all of us can do something. Okay? So that's the financial side of things. It's important because it literally every $1,500 we raise, a child's able to get rescued. So that's important. But let me tell you about what excites me more, because I'm a pastor. So, you talk to Luke or me for any amount of time, and you realize that there's nothing that gets us more fired up than when we see our people connect deeply to the heart of God on the things that matter the most, the nearest and dearest to his heart. Because the reality is, when people connect to God's heart, when the things that matter the most and are the nearest and dearest to the heart of God become the same things that matter the most and are the nearest and dearest to the hearts of his kids, it doesn't get any better than that. Am I right? It doesn't get any better than that. So for me, the most significant thing in this is helping people connect to God's heart on this issue. Our God loves children. And he's passed that on to us. Our ability to love our kids, our grandkids, that comes from our Heavenly Father. And God's saying, I don't want you just fighting for your kids and your family. I want you to fight for other kids too. And we have an opportunity to do that. And for me, what I love to do is help people figure out their best yes. So God has given you creativity. God has given you a job for many of you. God has given you an expertise. God has given you a hobby or a passion that you love. How do you take that and tie it into rescuing kids? How do you take something you already have experience in, something you already love to do, and tie it in to raise awareness and set kids free? Last weekend, we had what's called the Freedom Walk. It's the first annual one in Goshen. I worked with Goshen Rotary. I don't know if you mentioned there's some Rotary groups that are around here. I don't know if anybody's in Rotary, Kiwanis, any of those kinds of civic organizations. But there was a gentleman in Rotary that God stirred up and said, we've got to do something. So we started going to local businesses and asking them to sponsor the event. We went to churches and schools and other businesses and invited them to put teams together to come out and walk in this. It was 24 hours. They wanted to do 24 hours. It was the idea that, what these girls go through in a 24-hour period, basically his idea was like, we should hurt a little bit. Like, this should be a little bit painful for us with how much walking and running and stuff that we're doing, just to get a glimpse of some of the pain that these kids go through. So this 24-hour walk, the initial goal was $40,000. And then more schools and more churches and more businesses stepped up, and God continued to stir in the community, and they got the word out to more and more people. And then the goal was raised to $65,000, and then it was raised to $80,000, and then it was raised to $100,000. By the time we were done with that event, it had raised over $125,000 to rescue and restore kids. And it happened because a group of people from Rotary decided we need to do something with our voices and our influence in our community to raise awareness and set kids free. And all of us have that ability, from the oldest to the youngest. 2 summers ago, in Fort Wayne, 2 7-year-old girls. One of them did a lemonade stand for the summer, and her best friend made little homemade candies and sold those. Those 2 7-year-olds raised over $2,200 and rescued a child. 2 7-year-olds. I have motorcycle groups that actually, yesterday morning, the motorcycle group in Fort Wayne, this is their 4th year that they're doing a motorcycle ride, and all the money that they raise, it's something they already love to do, They're just doing it on purpose now. And they've rescued 10 kids over the last 4 years. Race to Rescue. People join an event already, a run that's already going on in the community. They just set up a Classy page with us and share it with their friends and say, hey, I'm going to do this run, but I would love to have a bigger purpose to it. I'd like to rescue a kid in this. Would you guys support me in this? Ford for Fitness is the one in Fort Wayne. We had 12 churches that put teams in that event 2 years ago, raised $42,000. They were going to go run and walk anyways. Why not do it with a purpose? Every one of you in here has something in your past or present that God has given you with the ability to join it into a bigger purpose. It may be your business. It may be a school thing. It may be through the church family. Whatever that is, all of you have this God-given creativity where you can come up with a way to rescue a kid. Because those numbers I gave you earlier were big. 150 billion, 99 billion, 1 million children. But the most important number you need to hear is one. Because you can't be the difference for all, but you can be the difference for at least one. So if God is stirring in your heart, man, lean into that. Get into the conversations. Talk with Pastor Luke and Abby, and talk with leadership. Get a hold of me, and let's figure out what your best yes is and how God wants to leverage that to set kids free. Let me finish with just a story for you about Mew. Mew was one of our girls, like many of the girls that we found out, like met her social media. You know, when we go back to that border station crossing I was telling you about, well over half of those that we interviewed, those girls, they met their trafficker on social media. So I know we have teenagers in here. You please be careful of how you use social media. There are traffickers everywhere on social media. If you have even grandkids that play video games now, all those video games have chat features on them. There are traffickers all over those. Traffickers creating false profiles all over every social media platform looking for vulnerable teens, looking for teens who are talking about being lonely and depressed and suicidal and have a terrible relationship with their parents. They are everywhere. Got to be careful with that kind of stuff. So Mew was one of these girls that was in a village, and she went to the big city to get a job. Same story like I talked about earlier. She was seen as being a vulnerable young girl. She was coerced to working at a brothel, where she was used and abused for well over a year, until our guys, because of people like you, because of churches like yours, were able to get her out of that situation. She went into the cosmetology training program while she was going through, while we were working with her on the trauma of everything she had gone through. And eventually she would go on to open up a salon with another girl that we rescued. And at one point we had a Christmas party a couple of years ago. And you could imagine a room full of 12 to 17-year-old girls. That's going to get a little loud, a little obnoxious, right? They're going to get a little cackly there. And they're having fun, they're teasing each other, doing what you would hope to see healthy 12 to 17-year-old girls doing, having fun together. But then the atmosphere changed and started to get more serious, and girls started getting up one by one and sharing a little bit of their stories, sharing what they'd been rescued out of. And Mew is a pretty quiet girl, but eventually she got up as well. And she shared some of her story that she had been rescued out of. And when she got finished, she said something that is the motivation, so much of the motivation behind why I do what I do on an everyday basis. She simply looked at our caseworkers, she looked at our rescue agents, and she simply said this. She said, "Thank you for considering my life worthy enough to come and rescue." I heard a statistic once that the average price to have sex with a child worldwide is $4.35. That's the value that the world has placed on young girls. And as followers of Christ, we couldn't be any more extreme opposite of that, could we? I mean, these are daughters of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and they are priceless. And they, as Tony said, they are worth the sacrifice. They are worth the love. They are worth the cost. So thank you for allowing me to be here with you. I know that you guys have been talking about this topic for a while, And I'm excited to see what God is going to do in and through you as individuals and as a church family to set more kids free.